Welcome to Tracks in Time. The track we'll be following for the next 2 episodes is barely 2 miles long, but we'll still spend a year exploring it. This is the Great Meadows National Wildlife Refuge in Concord. 250 acres of woods and wetland along the Concord River protect at least 240 species of birds and dozens of the plants, bushes, and trees that provide them all with shelter and food. Every season at the Concord Great Meadow presents a brand new landscape. So we'll walk the same track more than once, exploring its changes with naturalist and photographer Cherrie Corey.
I'm going to be taking you on a walk through the refuge through all 4 seasons of the year, beginning with the spring. Spring is when everything comes to life and the refuge unfolds week by week, layer by layer, and we will be walking through those moments in time and exploring the landscape, the wildlife, the changing skies, the elements, and hopefully coming away with a deep sense of this special place.
And what is it?
Song sparrow. Listening to the bubbly call of the marsh wren, and you usually hear the call, you very rarely see them, except in the very early morning and occasionally in the evening. The crabapples leafed out very early this year in March when we had some warm weather, and I'm just noticing that they have some frostbite from the temperatures that dropped very low last week. In the early spring, the water level in the river comes up quite high. We can see today that it's past this tree, which is my marker. Most years, over time, we would have spring floods anywhere from late March to the middle or end of April that would completely cover the trails for a week or so at a time, and we haven't had one of those in the last 3 years. But still, the river is up. And then unless we get an unusual amount of rain, we'll see the level retreat until the Concord River is just a trough. It's now the middle of April, and that's pretty much the right time for lesser celandine to be blooming. But many of the other plants are blooming early and late because this is such a mixed-up season. This particular patch that we can see, which is spread quite a bit through this area of woodland, only came here in 2010, 6 years ago, when we had a 50-year flood. And the river waters rose and filled this entire refuge basin with enough water that it looked like one big lake. And when it subsided, we were left with some new plants at the refuge.
Holy
Little
cow.
warbler wave right
Isn't
in front
this
of our
beautiful?
noses. You are in. Where did you go?
Oh my goodness.
Catching the sun so perfectly. Here we have honeysuckle and multiflora rose, both of which have put out leaves already as of early to mid-April this year, whereas all of the native plants along here are still bare-stemmed. What happy muskrat land that is. Just such a perfect place for you. We're at the bottom of the refuge impoundments, and in early spring this is the gathering place for all the Asian carp who are out in the river, and they congregate by the hundreds near the footbridge when they pick up the sense that the water is running through the bridge and out into the river, and they like to push against a current. So you'll see them here hoping that they can travel up into the impoundments. There's a dam that was built by both people and beaver, which will prevent them from actually getting in to the impoundments. But if we have a spring, when we have an overtopping flood come in, it just brings them in to the refuge by the hundreds. And we know that human beings have been wandering this area back as far as 11,000 years before present, that they were farming the areas in the plateau behind this refuge back to 5,000 and 7,000 years ago. The birds eat a lot of protein in the spring. Even seed-eating birds are eating protein because they need it for the babies. You see those gnats? It's a big feature of spring. There were thousands of them hatching underneath the branches of the trees in the early morning. Just thousands, and it looked like the air was alive. Spring is moving along much more quickly now, and all around us are the sounds of courting birds and territorial songs and the sound of wind. We're entering a season when nights can have showers and dramatic cloud displays and radiant crepuscular light, those heavenly rays that come out of the clouds, and strong winds and quick clearings. The greens are beginning to even out their tone from 100 shades of green that ushered in the season. This will be one of the last days we can see out and over the marsh. In another day or a week, the cattails will grow too tall and will be surrounded by a forest of rushes. The green is filling in Great Meadows. Bright green is the buttonbush, and this is the time, third week of May is the week when you can find it. The light and the weather initiate it, but what you notice that's different, almost more than the landscape changes, is the sounds and the constant movement, and I mean everything's in motion, from insects hatching to birds mating and feathering nests to ducklings in the water. Everything's moving. So there are rhythms there to come to know here at Great Meadows. There are seasonal rhythms, and there are monthly rhythms that are sort of subtler changes within the seasons. There are daily rhythms of dusk, high daylight, sort of midday to dawn rhythms where the wildlife and the sounds and the light all change. When I'm feeling irritated by the interruptions of air noise and other sort of civilized intrusions in this wild space, I soothe myself by reminding me that those two have rhythms. So if you're looking for quiet moments at Great Meadows, it's best to come at dawn when the sun rises and leave by 8:30 in the morning before all the planes take off. In June, when the cattails bloom, you get to see that they have their male and female flowers in two separate bunches or inflorescences. The female flower on the bottom and the male flower on the top. The male flower is made up entirely of stamens and is full of pollen. And this polleny mass was a major food source for the indigenous peoples who lived here, as was the root of the cattail, which was ground also into a flower. Once the males have released their pollen to the wind, they're wind pollinated, it falls down onto the female flowers all over the marshes, and eventually the males, through the shaking of wind and the drying of their pollen, will lose all of this fluff on top and be left with a curled and withered spike. So this is the beginning of that long saga of seed production and dispersal across the marshes. The blooming of common milkweed in Concord and here at Great Meadows sort of signals the time of the summer solstice. And this year we have a greater abundance of milkweed than I have seen in almost a decade. It's a beautiful plant with round clusters of flowers that are very fragrant, particularly in the evening. But we know it best as the plant that feeds the monarch butterfly caterpillar. Spring, early summer is a great time to see wildlife at the refuge. Lots of babies are being born. Goslings, ducklings, meadow voles, lots of baby birds in the trees around us. This morning as we walk, we've seen mama birds feeding their fledglings. As we're walking down the trail at Great Meadows, we're likely to encounter a number of reptiles and amphibians, many kinds of turtles and several kinds of frogs, and at least a couple of kinds of snakes. But the Blandings turtle in particular, which is now a rare species here, has lived in Concord for thousands of years, and it is now the focus of a major restoration project to bring its population up. Another hallmark of summer at Great Meadows is the sky. We've got changing winds, passing storms, and it brings these incredible cloud stories across this expanse that really is unparalleled anywhere in the Concord area. No story about Great Meadows plants is complete today without talking about invasive plant species. Glossy buckthorn in particular can grow just about anywhere. It also bears tremendous amounts of fruit which the birds love and then eat and distribute the seeds. Invasive plants are increasingly causing some of the greatest management challenges for this refuge and refuges everywhere. Here we have Oriental bittersweet, water chestnut in the river and in the marshes that has taken hundreds of hours and dollars over the years to clear out. Multiflora rose, which lines the hedgerows and the edges of forests all over town. We also have American lotus, which is increasingly becoming one of the most invasive plants at the refuge, completely covering over the impounded waters with its very large leaves. The milkweed is the beginning of a progression of flowers that really are the hallmark of this season of summer. And along the Dike Trail, which through much of the year, through especially late fall, winter, and early spring is quite bare along the edges, becomes this landscape of color and successive bloom. On the back of the kiosk at Great Meadows, where the famous blackboard resides, is information hardly anyone ever sees. We have the historical list of birds that have been seen at Great Meadows and their bar graphs of occurrence through each month of the year. And on the bottom is a list of many of the plant species that grow here at Great Meadows if you want to check. I also maintain a website called Sense of Place Concord, which heavily features the Great Meadows Refuge and includes informational posts and lots of photographs and resource links that will help enhance your visit here, answer questions, give you ideas and inspiration for future visits. What we're looking at now was once a great grassy meadow that for several hundred years was hayed by the local townspeople as a common land. So I'm stopping here in particular in our summer walk. We're to kind of open up to what is summary about our experience on the trail at the moment. First, there is the sounds of crickets and grasshoppers, many different kinds of species that are native to the Northeast, are really reaching their peak of song in late August. And what you're hearing isn't the single song of a single species, but many rhythms, melodies, and pitches kind of all blended together in this summer symphony. A couple of other plants that I always like to introduce visitors to in the summer. One is the groundnut, and it's a vining plant. There's some growing down in here and another nice leafy segment growing up here. Its flowers are a beautiful mauve pea-colored flower, but when it's done blooming, the flowers produce these string bean-like pods of seeds. Those beans can be dried and shelled and eaten, but the more important food source from the groundnut for native people and during colonial times is the tuber. It grows a sort of small potato-like starchy tuber. And this is one of the rarest plants actually growing in Concord, but it's not a native. It's from Northern Europe. It looks very much like Queen Anne's lace. It is a plant in that same family called milk parsley or hog fennel. Great Meadows is actually only one of 3 places in all of North America where it grows. We have records that this began appearing in the late 1800s, but we don't know why it was brought here or who introduced it. So we haven't moved very far. This happens as I walk through the refuge because I'm always looking and interested in getting others to see how much there is in a short distance. But here we're kind of at an interface between the trail-edged habitat and the marshes. Here there's some ripening grapes down near the water's edge. Over here are these beautiful, unusually blue-colored berries of the silky dogwood. And silky dogwood is one of the dominant shrubs of our low, wet, wooded areas of Concord. We're now sort of emerging from this overgrowth of red maples and silver maples and oaks and shrubbery, wetland, lowland shrubbery, to this open expanse. What we're looking out at in this summer landscape looks a little muted in color now because a lot of the flowers, the brighter flowers, have gone by. The densest growth is of the showy tick trefoil. It has these pea-like purpley blossoms that grow in a spire in late July through mid-August, which turn into these segmented pod-like fruiting structure covered with very stiff hairs, and when you run your hand across them it feels like Velcro. These pods that feel like what we call Velcro were an inspiration for the scientists who first developed the idea of commercially made Velcro. These are evening primroses, and all of these fresh flowers opened after sunset last night. The primrose sends out one bloom a day, and these are the flowers from yesterday that are closed. And after the sun goes down and it's almost too dark to see, these fresh blossoms open up. And at this time of August, if you can stand the mosquitoes that come out after dark and hang out by the evening primrose, all of these hawk moths come in to pollinate them that are the size of hummingbirds. You can see on these plants that have already been blooming for a while that many of them are starting to make their fruiting capsules down below. And in another week or two, we should begin to notice what look like little drill holes in these fruiting capsules. And those drill holes will have been made by the caterpillars of the primrose moth. The caterpillars hatch inside and munch their way out, and they grow to be about the same size. They're the same color, and they even have ridges on them that look like the ridges on these capsules. But what's most spectacular about that moth is that when those caterpillars pupate and become the moths, they are a beautiful clear yellow color of this flower with a shocking pink center. So they're anything but camouflaged. And they then will sit with their heads stuffed down inside the center of the flower, lying on the flower as if they think you can't see them. Yes, there's a daisy down here, which most people would think, oh yeah, daisies, but I've never seen a daisy at Great Meadows. That is not unusual. There is regular annual flooding here that will often with it bring seeds from other parts of the town. So we're looking out over the expanse of one of the two impoundments, meaning diked in water pools of the Great Meadows Refuge. And this first one actually was put in prior to the 1920s, so it's been here a long time. And over the course of decades, a shallow water marsh has developed with many native plants. But out in the center, this beautiful expanse of white that you see is the North American Native American lotus. Many people think these are water lilies, but they're actually lotus plants. And when they get into an enclosed wetland like this, they tend to be invasive. They produce these beautiful pods that each create about 30 seeds apiece, and those seeds have been reported to have the longevity of 50 to 100 years. Pickerelweed and purple loosestrife were in the past problems in terms of their aggressive growth before the lotus moved in. Dealing with the lotus and kind of beating it back or moving it out is probably one of the most confounding problems they've faced in a long time. So it's one or the other. The high side of all of this for those walking here is that nearly all of these invasive wetland plants are beautiful to look at.
Mosquitoes tonight, it's kind of warm, so I don't think they'll bother us. Yeah, it is still, but I haven't really been bit until it gets dark. But when the sun goes down, if we're up by the river, they come out of the bushes. There are different groups of crickets, and some live on the ground in the grasses and under the leaf litters. Some live in the bushes, and some actually call from the treetops. I believe those are marsh crickets. That have a continuous high, almost metallic trill. Elderberries, grapes, silky dogwood, everything is going wild with their fruit this year. It's a really good fruiting year, even apples. This one looks like it's blooming from the top down, but actually it is blooming from the bottom up. It's just that the top collapses open once it's time for it to get to business. It are the buds of the flowers that are going to open below. So as these finish blooming and drop, this gently unfolds another layer. Fly up there past that tree line to Gordon Pond, and they settle down in the treetops around the pond. And if there's enough of them, they look like a pearl necklace kind of draped in the trees. It's been blooming for over a month.
It's and the top up?
Yeah, it's from the bottom up to top. So so there will be no vervain flowers in another week probably anywhere here.
The cardinal flower is one of our most spectacular summer wildflowers. Look at the glow here and the blaze across the river.